Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Quantum Nurse Freedom International live stream. I hope this day is good for you, and this is one of the conversations that you must listen and you must share. Okay, so like it or not, just share it. And you- we are very blessed and we are privileged that we could have our featured guest today is John Perkins, and he's well known to most of you. And to those who don't know him, just make sure you go to johnperkins.org. He is New York's Best Times author on his famous book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So, needless to say, with everything that's going on around the world, he would be a perfect guest for today. And and John also has written a lot of books in addition to the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, like Touching the Jaguar, Hoodwink, The Secret History of the American Empire, Shape Shifting, The World is as You Dream It, Psycho Navigation, The Stress Free Habit, Spirit of the Shore, and who knows what else he's going to come up with. So thank you, John. And as John continues to have a conversation with us and with you out there, I'm sure you'll get to know him more. So, and with me, I'm very excited and honored also that I have Dr. Reza Janvidadi, who was also he's been our guest before, and he's a filmmaker that expands to over 50 documentary films focusing on identity, culture, and portrayal of West Asian and Muslim narratives in the cinema. And of course, I have Roy Colin and Hartmut Schumacher. They've been my ongoing co-host since 2020, and Robert Coleman with his Awakening podcast. Follow him, and Hartmut, go your own path. And so, and who knows, there might be another person who will come as a surprise to some of you, but maybe not to most of you. So, anyway, thank you for everyone. And John, thank you, thank you, thank you. And
So
so,
that's always on mute. Thanks, Grace. It's my pleasure to be with you and deeply honored. Thank you.
So I was thinking because it's John's first time here, and feel free, John, let us know more, and how you even began this work. But the questions usually is, well, you labeled yourself as the economic hitman, and that's really a very enticing title. So for our viewers, what is an economic hitman, and um, how did you come to be the economic hitman? And I think for me, I'm also asking, are there more of you or doing the same thing as of this moment? Because it seems like there's always the shadows of economic hitman all over the world. So please start, and then or you could start wherever you want to start, and all my colleagues will just join in with this conversation.
Well, yeah, I'll start with what is an economic hitman, I guess. And my official title was chief economist at a major U.S. consulting firm. Um, but my job, and I had a staff of up to 50 people. My job was to get them, and for me to identify countries with resources our corporations want, like oil, or today it's more likely to be some of the rare minerals that are used in high tech, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually went to the country. Instead, it went to our own corporations, usually big engineering construction firms, that made big profits out of constructing things like power plants, whole power systems, industrial parks, highways, ports, airports, big infrastructure projects that helped a few rich families in those countries, the ones that own the industries, that own the commercial establishments, the ones that make the most use out of this infrastructure. But it was really not a good thing for the majority of the people because money would be diverted from health care, education, and other social services to pay the interest on the debt. And in the end, the principal couldn't be paid. And so we'd go back and say, hey, your collateral is your oil or whatever the resource is. Sell your oil real cheap to our corporations without any environmental or social regulations. Let us build a military base on your soil. Vote with us at the next United Nations vote against Cuba or China or whatever. And, in that way, we really, our job was to create what you could almost say is a corporate empire. It's not really an American empire, it's a corporate empire, but it's always been very, very much supported by the US government. And that was my job. And it was I have to say it was a fairly easy job, because when you go to a president of a country and you say, hey, got a lot of money in this hand, billions of dollars, that's really going to help you and your family if you sign up to this deal. And on the other hand, we'd say, but if you don't, on this hand, I got a gun. Now, I didn't actually carry a gun, but these presidents knew, as I did, that the people we call the jackals were right behind me. These are, usually CIA assets that have overthrown or assassinated leaders around the world, like Allende in Chile, and Arbenz in Guatemala, and Mossadegh in Iran, and on and on and on. There's a long history of this. So, these presidents were put in this position of, doing something that would really benefit them and their friends and family economically, or run the risk of being overthrown or assassinated.
So, John, how long did it take you to really realize that, okay, you're done with whatever you're doing and it's really affecting globally, and especially the local countries with their economic situation? And the saddest part is, when there's poverty, it's just really the breeding ground of a lot of things. And like what was your, like, that moment that I said, okay, that's it for me, and you're going to go somewhere else or do something else?
Well, first of all, I'd say, I did this job for 10 years, and for at least 7 of those years, I thought I was doing the right thing, because I graduated from business school, and in business school and the World Bank and the IMF and all these other organizations will tell you that if you want to help a poor country, invest heavily in this infrastructure, and the GDP will grow, the gross domestic product, the economy will grow. And statistically, we can show that that's true. It happens. And so I believed in what I was doing. I thought I was helping the majority of the people. And of course, we have this statistic called GDP per capita. And you show that growing, and it implies that everybody's getting this amount of money that we say is the GDP per capita, which is a total lie. It's completely deceptive. The fact of the matter is GDP it really measures how well the wealthy are doing and the big corporations. And GDP per capita is simply that number divided by the population. So people actually can be getting worse off, the majority of the people, while a few of the wealthy families are increasing and building more and more industry and so forth. And it makes it look very, very good. So for about 7 of those 10 years, I thought I was doing the right thing. And then one of my clients was Omar Torrijos, who was the head of state of Panama. And he became a friend, and he took me aside one time and he said, John, don't you realize that you're lying to yourself and to the world when you do this? And he kind of explained this to me. And, I began to really see the truth behind this. And yet at the same time, I did not want to see the truth. I come from a relatively poor teacher's family in rural United States, rural New Hampshire. And now suddenly I'm traveling first class around the world, eating in the best restaurants, staying in the finest hotels, wining and dining with presidents, and making a very good salary. I did not want to believe what I knew to be true. It took me 3 years, and plus there was a lot of pressure on me not to get out. So it took me another 3 years before I finally got out and decided that I would use what I knew to try to change the system.
And how did your family take that change?
Well, my family didn't really know much about what I was really doing. At the time, I'm an only child. My parents were teachers in rural New Hampshire. Uh, they were not really savvy to what was going on in this situation, and they knew I was traveling a lot, and they knew I loved to do that. I was married, but I was in the process of getting divorced, and I didn't have any children, so family really wasn't an issue.
Before I pass it on, John, to Roy, I wanted to, since you and I both live in United States, I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on what's going on with all the Trump's reversal orders, especially concerning USAID, because some of us know what USAID really means to other countries, especially when it comes to chains of government. So, how about share your thoughts on what current administration is doing, and especially would that be beneficial to not just to the Americans but also to the other countries concerned, because we also know that United States has the most number of military bases all over the world. I can't even remember how many we have in the Philippines, but it's just so many. And talking about Panama, since you've been there, I guess, think even in Panama. So why don't you share with us your commentaries on the current Trump administration reversal orders?
Well, it depends on whose point of view you're looking at this from. And, in my books, I write about the problems of foreign aid, U.S. foreign aid, and how that's helped to expand this empire, if you want to call it that. Uh, but right now, we're dealing with a very, very tricky situation because China is taking over. And I just want to share this map, which I think is very telling. It's produced by the International Monetary Fund. Incidentally, up at the top, you've got, back in the year 2000, the United States was a top trading partner with about 80% of the world's countries. And today it's China. In 25 years, China's taken over. And China's economic hitmen are extremely efficient. I taught at a business school in Shanghai to Chinese students, and I realized very quickly that what they really wanted to do was learn from me about my successes and my mistakes, so they wouldn't make the same mistakes and they would be able to build on the successes. They've been extremely efficient. And so when the United States cuts back on foreign aid and all the many other things that we're doing, and really threatens to threatens democracy. I think this current administration is threatening democracy. It opens the door to China. So by us pulling out of foreign aid doesn't mean that it's going to get better, because China can do the same thing. China has a very different story and a very different approach, but the goal is basically the same, and that is to control resources around the world and to be the number one dominating power in the world. And it's being very successful. So in the last few years, the whole situation has radically changed. And although U.S. foreign aid has been used to promote American hegemony, if we drop that aid, China will step in and promote their own hegemony. And I think that's an issue that really needs to be looked at very, very seriously.
Thank you, John. Roy?
Thanks, Chris. Hi, John.
Right.
So I've got my Awakening podcast 5 years, and when I started it, I made a list of 10 guests that I'd love to have on it, and yeah, you were one of them. So it's actually a pleasure to actually be speaking with you today. I'd like to just kind of go back to the start, because I heard you talk about it, and I think it's kind of relevant. Is when you were recruited, how the process went, because you didn't think you were going to get in. You might just let the listeners know about that.
Yes. So you mean as far as getting into what?
In the position like that you were doing as an economic hitman that when you were recruited?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, because originally when I got out of college, I was facing the Vietnam draft, and I didn't believe in the Vietnam War. I was determined not to go. I didn't want to kill people I had nothing against or be killed by them. And a good friend of my wife's was very, very high up in the National Security Agency, the NSA. I think this is probably the NSA calling right now to say, don't
End the
talk
call.
about
End the call.
don't talk about this. Sorry about that. But they're watching. They're watching. So anyway, so so the NSA was a draft deferrable job, and I went through the series of extensive interviews, including lie detector tests, and I thought my answers to those tests were going to completely disqualify me for the job. There's a lot of stories there, but one of them is that I was under the lie detector. I said I was opposed to the war in Vietnam. I didn't think they would like that. Another one, they asked me if I'd ever been in trouble with the police. If I'd ever, and it just so happened that, when I had left, I dropped out of another school earlier, Middlebury College in Vermont, before I went to business school. And a friend of mine there, who was an Iranian, got in a knife fight to protect me. So a guy sucker punched me. It's a long story, but a guy sucker punches me. This Iranian guy pulls out a knife and cuts him on the face, not very seriously, but does. And we go running off and hide. And the next morning, the police get us. And they're interviewing me without his presence there. And I lied to them. I said, no, he didn't do any such thing. I didn't see him doing such thing. So I figured that's also, a strike against me. As it turned out, the NSA liked the fact that I lied. I had the guts to lie to the police, and they knew we were losing the war in Vietnam at that point. They knew that it was actually silly for anyone to go to that war, even though officially we still supported it. And it just turned out that the guy who pulled the knife was Iranian. His father was a general in the Shah's cabinet and Shah's army and Shah of Iran, and was a CIA asset. So they saw that as a real benefit. So I get recruited, but in the meantime, I had heard about the Peace Corps, and I really liked the idea of the Peace Corps and going. I wanted to go to the Amazon. I really had a great desire to go to the Amazon. And so I asked the Peace Corps recruiter if I request the Amazon, am I likely to get it? And he said, yeah, nobody wants to go to the Amazon, so I'm pretty sure you'll get it. So I called my friend up, and my wife's friend at the NSA, again, is this very high position, and I tell him this, and he says, well, go to the Peace Corps. I'll even help you make sure you get to the Amazon, because you'll learn survival techniques, and you'll learn other languages. And you'll be much more valuable to us when you get out. You'll learn about interrelationships with cultures. And then you can come work for us. But you may not end up working for us. You may end up working for a private corporation, because we do a lot of our work through subcontractors. So that's pretty much what happened.
No, the reason that I brought that up is because I was reading Corruptible, and it's kind of, they were saying the people going into the positions, and it's like they probably knew based on your answers, because I'm sure they knew what it was. I don't know, was it connected with the guy with the scar? Because I hadn't heard that story before, but it's like they know then that, you'll do what they'll ask you to do. I know you've made a change and a transition in life. So when you're actually in there then, because I had heard that you're not by the government, so it kind of lets the government off. It's a corporation. So like, are they corporations that people would know, or is it just some corporations that's actually created, and we're all the hitmen in the same kind of corporation?
Well, no, I worked for a company called Charles T. Main, which had about 2,000 consultants, primarily engineers out of Boston. It's since been sold, in the 80s. It was sold to Parsons Engineering Company, and so the name is no longer out there. But we were very, very influential at the time. We were a very private, very secretive company. Nobody was allowed to talk to the media, to the press, about anything we did, but we had a lot of influence. And so I'm working for a private company. Most of our contracts, the ones that I was under, were with USAID, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the IMF, the US Treasury Department, or the US State Department. And so I did not work for those organizations, but my company had these contracts with them. So, my salary came through the company. but it came from them. So we were really very much, very deeply connected with these. And my own boss, Ina Grieve, was a senior vice president, and then the president, Bruno Zambati, also became very close to me. And they were, especially Ina, was a liaison with the U.S. intelligence agencies, the CIA and the NSA. He was in the Army Reserve. He was very high up in the U.S. Army Reserve, and was a liaison. So there was a very deep and strong connection there.
And if you were caught, then were you trained how to deal with if somebody actually? Because I mean, you're going into a government official. They know what you're doing, and I mean, they'll either accept it or they won't. But if they want to kind of capture you, was there any training that if things went pear-shaped for you?
Well, I wasn't doing anything illegal. A lot of what I did should be illegal, but because the United States has so much authority over writing the laws, it wasn't illegal. And even we really were bribing people, but legally. So, we would go in, and I would go in and I'd say, if you take this contract, well, Mr. President, your sister owns the John Deere franchise, and our corporations will run a lot of John Deere equipment. And, we're not going to negotiate for a lower price. In fact, we'll pay, I would say this very carefully, but, we're willing to pay $2 million for $1 million worth of equipment rental. And what you do with the other $1 million, what your sister does, that's up to her, whether she gives it to you or what. That's a bribe, but it's completely legal. We were very careful to stay within the letter of the law. And, we did a lot of other things, like we would offer the president and all of his cronies and all of his friends and families scholarships for their children to go to school in the United States. And we were a Boston-based firm. We had very strong connections with a lot of the big universities in Boston, Harvard, MIT, Boston University, so on and so forth, a lot of them. And we would give these scholarships out, and they were worth a lot of money. And we'd offer these children jobs during vacations or after they got out of school. So this was worth a lot of money, not illegal. So I was never actually doing anything illegal that I could be caught for in these countries, if you will. The closest I came to having a problem like that was in 1978, and I was in Tehran, Iran. And I'm sitting in the bar at the Hotel Intercontinental one night, and this guy who cut the face of the 10 years earlier, this Iranian fellow, comes up to me. I hadn't seen him in 10 years, and his name, I use his name as Farhad. We have a little conversation, and he says, "Hey, John, I got a ticket for the two of us tomorrow to fly out at the Air France first morning flight to Rome." And I said, no, I have a meeting with the Minister of Finance tomorrow. Well, he says, there is no Minister of Finance. He's in Rome. You better get going. You got to come with me to Rome. And it was that next day we flew to Rome. I stayed with his father, who was this ex-army general in the Shah's army. And that next day is when the bombs went off in a movie theater in Iran, and the revolution started. So I realized since that, if I'd stayed any longer, I might very well have been one of those hostages.
And like when there's the people that are translating, are they year translators? And is the meetings recorded as well? And how do you get the information back?
Wow, Roy, you really hit the nail on the head. Yeah, so Iran, for example, took us completely by surprise. My company lost a lot of money because the Shah owed us money. They always paid their debts. They had a lot of oil, but it took 3 to 6 months before we'd get paid. And so we had a lot of money outstanding that was then confiscated by the new government when the Shah was overthrown. We had no idea. We didn't have those kind of agreements with other countries. Because money came through the World Bank, so we got it through the World Bank. Iran was different because it had its own money. It had petrodollars. We were there to keep Iran within our sphere, to have them use their petrodollars to hire U.S. companies to build big projects, and to make sure that they didn't turn toward Russia or China or someplace else, that they stay within our sphere. So we weren't afraid to have them owe us money because they always paid their bills. And so, but to think back of how naive we were, and I think the CIA, I think the NSA were very naive too. And a lot of that reason was because we relied on translators. None of us spoke very good Farsi. I think there was fewer CIA agents who did, but I didn't. And so, as I look back, I realize that those translators or interpreters, they were telling us whatever they wanted to tell us, and they all worked for the Shah. And most of them had been to school in the United States or England. They spoke English, and so they were very biased in favor of supporting the Shah. And that's one of the reasons I think we were so taken by surprise, because we just didn't deal with the common people. Now, I speak fluent Spanish, and it was very different when I worked in Latin American countries. I was understanding the resentment of the U.S. and the support of some of what we call terrorist organizations. I could really understand it because I could talk to the people. But in most of those countries I worked in, other than Latin America, I had no idea really what people were saying. It all came through interpreters.
And like obviously you can understand everything the way the monetary fund is controlled, the World Bank, IMF, like it's still happening, and it's still, this country's still in debt and everything. Based on your experience and your knowledge, how can we change that?
Well, it's happening now, and I've written, the Confessions of an Economic Hitman is a trilogy. And the most recent one, which came out a little over a year ago, is about China's economic hitman. And so what the world is coping with right now is a huge competition. And both the United States and China have been working hard to get better than the other country at essentially, I could say, stealing resources from around the world. And that's really been heightened by the need for the high-tech rare minerals that are used in high tech. And I say that this is competition. It seems to me that the Trump administration is backing away from it and ceding to China, whether not intentionally. But there's a wonderful Chinese proverb that says, if you want to build an empire, make friends, not enemies. And the United States has made enemies, and we continue to make enemies. And I think this new administration is really making enemies. The Latin Americans are very upset by the threat to take over the Panama Canal and the threat to impose tariffs on Colombia and Mexico and other places. That's making enemies. China works very hard to make friends. The United States has about 170 military bases in over 100 countries. China has one in Djibouti, and maybe 3 or 4 others that are really more supply and repair establishments. So nobody wants a foreign military base on their soil. So we've done a lot to make enemies. At the same time, we invested huge amounts of our resources in Afghanistan and Iraq and in some of the other wars now in Ukraine and with Israel. And that's caused a tremendous resentment. First, it sort of defines us as anti-Muslim, but also we've pretty much ignored Latin America and Africa after 9/11 because we invested so many resources in the Middle East. China moved in to Latin America and Africa. They did not spend their resources on wars they couldn't win. Instead, they've really devoted themselves to creating more trade. They are exceptionally good at trading and commerce, and they've done a bang-up job of making that happen.
And like you said, like, the Americans kind of do it with their military bases and everything, but are the Chinese doing it with a smile but still taking over? Because I've heard a lot of the ports and everything the Chinese have control over. They're doing all the roads and everything, but at what price to the countries that don't do it? Is it really the same thing, but they're doing it as if it's their friends?
Yeah, but they go. So here's another difference. That if let's say we go to Peru and we talk to Peru and we say, well, look, if you accept our deal here, we'll make you a most favored nation. with the United States, which means you'll have a special trading relationship with the US. It doesn't involve anyone else. China goes in and says, we'll make you part of the new Silk Road. We'll build a big port for you so you can trade with Africa and Asia and the rest of Latin America. It's not about, they say it's not about Peru and China. It's about we're helping Peru become a world entity, part of the new Silk Road. And, you know, that's very, very misleading, but it's an extremely attractive message to give to a president of a country who wants to take a message out to his people. We're building this big port, and it's going to connect us with Argentina and with the Philippines and with Malaysia and with Indonesia and with Africa. And again, and China also has a very, very compelling story in that it can tell these countries, look, we had 10% economic growth for 30 years. Nobody else has ever done that. We brought 900 million people out of dire poverty. That's twice the population of the United States. No one's ever done that. So if you want to help your country, adopt our model. Work with us. We'll help you. It's an extremely compelling model, Roy. And again, it's deceptive. And then China also says, and we're not going to try to influence your politics, you know, which the United States and the IMF, the World Bank, you know, have all these conditionalities around that. So you know, I remember when I first was working and understanding what China was doing and teaching at the program there, I thought, my God, why didn't we think of some of these things?
So just finally, before you pass you over to Hartmut, because a lot of people would say, oh, you've come up and you said it is a controlled opposition and everything. But I know there was an attempt on your life. And I think that's important that people would actually know what happened there.
Well, first of all, when I quit being an economic hitman, I started writing a book about what I did. And I wanted it to be an expose. I wanted to contact other economic hitmen and jackals and get their stories. So I started contacting them. And immediately I got phone calls threatening my life, anonymous phone calls, threatening my life and that of my infant daughter. And I was terrified because I knew what the jackals can do. I'd seen, you know, they had allegedly killed two of my clients, the president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and also Omar Torrijos of Panama, the guy who taught me so much. And they both died in these very suspicious private plane crashes within 3 months of each other. And so I knew I was scared. And very soon after that, the president of Stone and Webster Engineering Company, which had been one of our competitors, another big consulting firm out of Boston, took me out to dinner and he said, you know, we'd like to use your resume in our proposals. You were chief economist at our rival company. You won't have to do any work for us, but we'd like to use your resume in our proposals. That's not an unusual thing, as you probably know, Roy. It's, you know, and he said, you know, I'm prepared to write you a check for $500,000 tomorrow morning as a retainer. $500,000. This was in the 80s. It was a lot of money. And he said, and I've now quit my job. I don't have a job. and he says, just don't write that book. And so I'm kind of getting the same thing that I'd been selling to other countries. I mean, I'm being offered a lot of money in this hand or a gun in that hand. I'm getting these threats. And so what would you do? What would you do? Well, I took the money. And, you know, I'll say in my own defense, I didn't go out and buy a fancy yacht or private plane or something. I reinvested it in going back to the Amazon, where I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer, forming nonprofits to help protect the rainforest, and also to writing books about that. So my first 5 books were about indigenous people. Stone and Webster didn't care. That was fine. I could write those books. But I didn't write the book until 9/11. And on 9/11, I was in the Amazon with a group of people. But when I came home, I flew up to New York. When I stood there at that horrible sight, I knew I had to write this book. But this time I decided I would write. I wouldn't tell anybody I was writing it. I wouldn't contact anyone else. It wouldn't be an expose. It would be a personal confession, just my own story. And so nobody would know I was writing this book until it was fully written. And I figured it was my insurance policy. Once it's in the hands of a New York agent, very good one, and he sent it out to a bunch of publishers, it's my best insurance policy, because any of the alphabet agencies, the CIA, NSA, whoever, who might want to get rid of me would know that something strange happens to me, it's going to sell a lot of copies of that book. I'm going to be a martyr. So it seemed to be my best insurance policy. And it's another story, and there's later I did get poisoned. So but I don't know whether you want me to go into that.
No, that's what I was talking about. But
that's the one you were looking for, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah. So 3 or 4 months after the Confessions was published, and it had already gone to the New York Times bestseller list, and it ended up staying there for 70 some odd weeks. I'm invited to speak at the United Nations. And I was living in Florida at the time. I flew up to New York. I was supposed to speak on a what was it? I guess on a Monday. And I flew up on a Sunday. And so I was staying with a good friend who had a condo near Central Park. And I had a publicist, and I was getting a lot of demands, a lot of requests for interviews, and she was filtering them. And one of them came from this freelance journalist, who was not very impressive. So I had said no. She'd filtered it and said no. And then she calls me just before a couple of days before I'm flying to New York. And she says, well, he's got a really nice car. He's offering to pick you up at the airport in New York and take you out to lunch and then take you to where you're staying. She said, that sounds better than a taxi, doesn't it? And I said, sure. So I did it. And when at lunch, he took me to a really nice Italian restaurant for lunch, and I get the food sitting in front of me, and I go to the restroom, which I'll never do it that way again. And after he takes me to my friend's condo, and within 3 or 4 hours, I have this extreme internal bleeding, and they estimate that I lost more than half the blood in my body. I called a friend of the woman I was staying with. She was an old friend who was a producer at NBC News, Tom Brokaw, and she had a good friend who was a very well-known doctor in what do you call it? It's an internal doctor, and he got him on the phone about 7:30 at night, and he says, "Oh my God, I'm not talking to him. I can hardly talk. I'm in shock. I'm in a really, really desperate situation. I've been lying on the floor." He says, "Get a cab. Don't call an ambulance. They take too long. Get to Lenox Hill Hospital, and I'll call ahead and make sure they've got blood for you, intravenous blood, and so on." And anyway, to make a long story short, I was there for about 2 weeks, and they removed 70% of my colon. And it was this emergency situation. After the fact, we began to get messages, my publicist, my publisher, and my nonprofits. Well, don't you know John was poisoned? And it had never occurred to me. But I talked to my doctors about this, and they said, well, it's entirely possible, but there's no way to prove that because the evidence has been incinerated. That's what we do when we take something out of your body. We immediately dispose of it. And so we have no proof, but the guy disappeared. The only thing my publicist had was an email address, and that was out of service. And I didn't really try to find him anyway because I had no evidence. But I did talk to a friend of mine who was a jackal. I'd befriended this guy who I knew was part of that, but we'd both gotten out at the time. And I called him and I asked him about this. He said, well, I'm pretty sure one of the alphabet agencies didn't do it. He said, because if they had, you wouldn't be talking to me now. And they also know that it wouldn't serve their best interest to have something like that happen to you because you'd become a martyr. And he said, well, who do you think did it? He said, well, probably a fanatic. My guess would be someone who who hated you for the work you did or hated you for exposing the work you did. And I said, well, is my life still in danger? And he said, probably not. Most of these people are cowards. The fact that he's disappeared, the fact that he didn't really confront you, he was very, he was very cowardly. And he probably figures that he scared the hell out of you enough anyway. And he's not going to show his face again. So far, that's been true.
Oh, excellent. Listen, thoroughly enjoyed it, John. Pass you on to Hartmut.
Hello, John. My real pleasure having to here on the show, especially because I worked as international consultant. I've been working as international consultant for 10 years as a freelancer. So I came in this business, not on your scale, but the funny thing is, I tried, for example, for an African country, I tried to implement a petrochemical facility. It's another word for a refinery, but we tried to work under the radar. And because we had all the equipment, we had all the technology, we had the finances, investors, everything was there. But it did not work out because the country was completely controlled by the oil industry of the West and completely controlled by the countries of the West. Because if you want to establish a facility for $3 billion or for $10 billion, in that moment you need a sovereign guarantee. And the sovereign guarantee is something which is signed and sealed by the World Economic Forum or IMF. And with these bank instruments, you can get money from the international banking system, because with this kind of guarantee, the country, which is the main investor, has the possibility to confiscate the project in the case that you cannot pay the debts. So, and the interestingly is that, in my opinion, the Chinese are very clever. On the one hand, if there is a commodity market, they put planes and vessels full of Chinese and Chinese families to the country, full of salesmen, and they buy it directly cash. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For example, we Europeans, we think, okay, send me an offer. How can we organize the bank instrument? Send us the proof of product and all that stuff. And the Chinese, they are in the city. They see the wagon coming with the copper and say, I buy it. Here's the money. Buy. And this is the reason why the Chinese are very fast. On the other hand, and this is the way I think also the Americans did, but at the moment the Chinese do it more efficiently. They get the sovereign guarantees from the countries, and if someone cannot pay the debts, for example, in that moment they can confiscate the complete port, and so the profit of the port will go to China and not to the country anymore. And by this threat, they have the possibility to ask for other things. For example, gold mine, coal, it doesn't matter. So they ask the whole time for for collaterals, and so they get the control of the collateral by the sovereign guarantees. When we wanted to implement the petrochemical facility, the government said we can give you a sovereign guarantee. We can give you a parliamentarian guarantee, but the parliamentarian guarantee has no value, because if the government changed after 4 years, the parliamentarian guarantee is nothing, and you don't get money with this. Yeah. So I think this is the way the Chinese work very efficiently.
Yes, they're very, very good at what they do, and they have a long history of being world traders. It goes back hundreds, 1,000 years or more. The old Silk Road, the original Silk Road, and it's so interesting that they very seldom use military force. unlike the United States. And they don't have that reputation, and they don't go in and assassinate or overthrow governments, at least as far as we know, they don't. And, we can say, well, what about Taiwan and Hong Kong and Tibet and the Indian border? Yeah, well, but they say, well, that's part of our territory. We have a right to claim these territories. After all, look, United States, didn't you take half of Mexico? Isn't Texas and New Mexico and so many states in the United States, they were once Mexico. So who are you to complain about, our immediate territory? But for the rest of the world, they do it through trade, and trade, it makes people a lot more comfortable than military occupation.
Yeah, I tried to make a business in Tanzania, and there I learned the quote, "Money talks, BS walks," and this is how it is.
Yeah.
So the Chinese are very fast in these things.
Yes.
And with respect to the United States, they, like you said, money or the gun. And when the people, I think the American or the USA worked also a lot with the IMF and the World Bank, getting sovereign guarantees and then exploiting other collaterals and collecting them. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's a rigged system, and it's kind of the system that we've implemented. I think you could almost say as a bullying system, and countries know not only the jackals stand behind us, but if the jackals fail, we've always got the military option. The United States figures it does, so it can go in as it did in Libya and Iraq and Panama back when it took out Noriega. And Noriega was a terrible person. He probably should have been taken out, but they didn't need to firebomb a huge section of Panama City and send in a huge. We sent them. We invaded Panama in uniform. Our uniformed soldiers went in and they firebombed a huge section of Panama City, and several thousand people. We don't know how many civilians died in the process. That does not leave a good feeling with people, not just Panamanians, but all over the world. The United States would do this. Now, China's never done anything like that, except as I said, the threat is there in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and they did invade Tibet, but they have a very different perspective of what that means, and that, I'm not justifying that they did that, but they've never done that in Africa or Latin America or the rest of the Middle East or the rest of Asia. So this leaves a very, very bad taste in people's mouths around the world. But the United States is a bully.
We can see it also in Congo. Yeah, what's going on in Congo right now? It's also the West. Yeah, it's and one moment I had this thought. The American, it's so interesting. We had the US dollar was gold backed, and it was oil backed, and now it's military backed, because there is the countries, they have only a chance to get out of the situation in which they are, because they are completely in debt to the USA or to the World Bank. Well, yeah, the World Bank is not really they organize the debts, but the debts is more, as you suppose, in the banks of the USA. And so the point is, if they want to get out of it, for example, by establishing a cryptocurrency which is commodity backed, the American, let's say the American system would see this as a threat, and is also potentially would involve, because in that moment they would try to get independent. We saw it like by Libya, for example.
Yeah, we saw it with Gaddafi in Libya, who he's threatened to have the dinar, the gold dinar, as a currency that he would sell oil for. And Saddam Hussein did something similar, and Iran threatened to do something similar. And whenever this happens, the United States puts an end to it as quickly as they can, and by whatever means it takes. Now, again, China has some other options here. So it's going to be very, very interesting to watch what happens in the next few years. And I would say once again that I think President Trump is playing right into China's hands. He's opening the door for China to move in so many ways that it hasn't even done yet, and just again antagonizing much of the world by his policies.
What is your thing? What are your thoughts about Greenland? Because I see it in Germany or in Europe. I see it this way: that I don't know whether we will have peace in Ukraine or not at the moment, because Zelensky offered the commodities to Donald Trump, but most of the commodities, I suppose, which are offered to Trump are in the east region of Ukraine, which is under control of Putin. So, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I mean, in what way? What's the question? Thoughts about what?
Do you think that Trump is going to end the war in Ukraine?
Oh, he says he is, but he says a lot of things that he never follows through on. So, with Trump, it's impossible to guess him, to guess what he's going to do. I have no idea. It's obviously a war that needs to end, but not at the price of Ukraine's liberty. And I think it's also something where we really need to reevaluate why Putin has done this. And I think the United States and NATO made a lot of mistakes over the past years of not trying to work out a better relationship with Putin, and not crossing that red line that was established as to how far NATO could go. So, but again, I don't have the foggiest notion of what Trump's going to do. I don't think anybody does. I don't think Trump knows what he's going to do. He's very impetuous.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because, for example, when he said, in my opinion, when he said Greenland, I got this idea, for example, that the European Union is facing a lot of problems. For example, the deindustrialization process, the economical process, and also, let's say, cultural tensions. And there is a possibility. We had Axel Reiner last time here in the show, and he said that the French are also of the opinion that it will lead, the economic situation in Europe will lead to a war. And with respect to the situation that we have a potential war in Europe, there is a possibility that Trump will get Greenland in this situation when Europe will become a difficult place to live.
Who knows? I hope you're wrong. I certainly hope that's.
I hope that's wrong.
I'm sure we all do. Again, I think the China factor is an important one here. That China is not, in general, a warlike nation, although they've now developed apparently a bomber that is the best one in the world and can't be seen. I'm trying to think of what the name for that is, but I can't right now. But anyway, but typically they have not expanded through that. Russia's another story entirely. What is Russia going to do? What is North Korea going to do? What are the two of them going to do together? And will they get the support of China? It's a very, very, very scary situation. Throughout the time when I was an economic hitman, that was the Cold War, and the enemy, if you will, the competitor, if you will, was the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union really didn't have much to offer the world. It had a very poor economy, really. It didn't, you go to Latin America, for example, and it really wasn't doing much in Latin America except threatening to do things and sending in Che Guevara with the 24 idealists. What did that amount to? And it didn't have the economy that could support this. What it did have was nuclear weapons. and very bellicose leaders like Khrushchev, who scared the hell out of us. And so, but that was it. But today we've got China that isn't bellicose for the most part and is incredibly strong economically. It's probably the top economy in the world today. Arguably, the United States and China are vying for this position, but the most recent statistics indicate that China's on top. Anyway, it's got an incredible economy, and it's made a lot of friends around the world and not so many enemies. And so this is a factor that I think is a positive one, frankly. You know, I want and I write about what I write about. I'm very critical of both China and the United States because both of us are creating what we call a death economy, an economic system that's consuming and polluting itself into extinction. China and the United States together control almost half the world's economy and create half the world's pollution. So this is going to be really interesting. And one of the things that's given me a little bit of hope, Helmut, recently is that my third book on the trilogy of Economic Hitmen, as I said, was about China's economic hitmen. It's very critical of China. It does tell about what they do right, but it's also extremely critical. And my publishers and I felt that it would never be published in China. The other two were, and they were very popular. But we felt that this one probably wouldn't be. But a couple of weeks ago, I received this. And it's the third edition that's very critical of China in Chinese, published by the same big publishing house in China as the other two books. And I have an interview with China News Agency that's later this week. And it's very popular. So what does that mean in terms of our view of censorship in China? I don't know what it means. But, you know, this whole time where we're looking at the U.S. democracy, the U.S. hegemony declining, China's increasing, and now we have a president in the United States that's totally unpredictable. And so far, from what I've seen, has done things that are putting China in a much better position, and the United States in a much worse position vis-a-vis the rest of the world.
Thank you so much, John. It was a real pleasure talking to you. I pass it to Dr. Reza. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, John.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Nope, can't hear you.
Can't hear me? Can you hear my voice?
No.
It's very soft, Reza.
Can you hear me now? Is
Yes.
that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's lovely to meet you. I remember when I was doing my PhD a few years back, every time I was looking up Hollywood and influence of politics on Hollywood, your book for some reason would keep coming up. And I keep initially thinking, is this a movie? Or so I had to read it and find out no, it's actually what you describe it as. So that's one interesting that I remember from your book. And the other thing you mentioned about the person who took you to Rome and the fire in the cinema that he mentioned, that happened to be 4 days before my birthday, and it happened to be in a cinema in the city where I'm born in. And my mother would always say, your dad had decided not to go to the cinema that day. If he had, before you were born, your dad wouldn't be. So, and it was always I was always curious to know, was this something to do with the government, or was this, the revolutionaries? But I think you've settled it for us who was responsible for it, because they knew for days in advance. My question, I have two questions for you, which I would love to get your answer to. One is the discussions that you had kind of show that there's a deep state that wants to perpetuate the US corporate economic hegemony around the world. And do you think in your mind that this deep state that is involved in what you were doing, the economic hitman, is it very much hand in hand with the government that comes into power, or does it do its own thing? And the government that is elected, that comes into power, Republican, Democrat, whatever, they have their own agenda, but they overlap in a lot of things they do hegemonically. That's the first question. The second question I would love to know from you is, so you've been on the side where you're actually asking the economies and the countries to do the bidding. What strategy would you advise them to defend themselves against such a move from outside, be it China, Russia, America, any country really?
What would they do to protect themselves against the economic hitman? Yeah. So let me confront that question first. I think, I have been advising, in Latin America, and been on a number of programs and so forth that I think reach some of the leaders, and Africa, that the solution to all of this is to look at these continents as having the most valuable resources in the world. You think about Africa as the wealthiest country in the world, resource-wise, and the poorest per capita or economically. Uh, so the solution is for these countries to come together, and demand that the high interest loans be dropped, demand that they're not going to sell their products to the rest of the world, their minerals and their other resources. They want more value added, and they want to be taken more seriously. But that's not likely to happen because there's so much animosity between so many of these countries. It's been attempted in Latin America a number of times. Bolivar was probably the most famous, and Martin, but it just hasn't worked well, and it hasn't worked in Africa. And you've got these tribal wars in Africa, or animosities, and so I don't know where this is going to go. I think we're at this time, Reza, in human history where we're really confronting something we've never confronted before. First of all, we're confronting the extinction of human beings through climate change and all the problems that we all know about. But those are all just kind of symptoms of the bigger problem, which is the death economy, an economic system that's based on extreme materialism and maximization of short-term profits for corporations. It's created a lot of amazing things in the world, but it's now reached its limit. And it's got to change, because it is taking us toward catastrophe quickly. And so we need to create a life economy, an economic system that pays people to clean up pollution, to regenerate destroyed environments, to recycle, to create new technologies. How do we produce energy from the air or water? We're pretty sure we can do that. So it's a very exciting time where we have this opportunity, and we have this motivation, and we're being pushed very strongly away from the death economy. We're receiving incredibly strong messages from all of nature. We know we need to change. And at the same time, we're caught in this old paradigm of it's their fault. It's them. We've got to compete with them. And how do we move beyond that? I wish I had the answer. I don't, but I think it's the important question that we all need to ask ourselves, that this really isn't about any country's hegemony. This is about human survival. We've seen ourselves as human supremacy, supreme over nature. We've got to change that. So I don't know whether that.
Do you think with the rise of BRICS, maybe with the rise of BRICS, an alternative form of governance around the world, right? Because America has been leading most of the world institutions, has been leading, Europe and all the Japan and all the major economies around the world. But as power is shifting economically and sometimes militarily towards the east, do you think having a multipolar world will enable countries to come up and become more organic, to be like the way you're describing, where it's life-based as opposed to death-based economies?
I think that opportunity is there. I think BRICS, is a big counterbalance to World Bank and the other, and not just BRICS, it's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And yes, they provide alternatives, which is always a good thing. So my friends in Ecuador or Peru or Colombia will tell you, if the United States gets to be too brutal to us, too much of a bully, we'll just threaten to turn to China, or we already have turned to China. But that makes us soften. And already World Bank policies seem to have changed considerably because of the influence of BRICS, that they know they have to compete on that level. But then again, we don't know where that's all going to go. We do know, as I've written in this book that's just been published in China, China has produced some terrible projects, dams that are doomed to fail and create huge amounts of toxic waste in the Amazon basin and the Amazon River, and gold mines and power plants that are not working. And they say they're on a learning curve. They'll get beyond that. But, it's who can have a crystal ball?
And finally, just your thoughts on the idea where I was discussing about the economic hitmen, that the group that you were part of and the things that you were doing. Is it separate from the U.S. government, or is it work tandem but not necessarily directly with each other?
You talked about earlier about deep state. It's never been my experience that there's some overriding conspiracy. There are conspiracies. There's a conspiracy to take out Castro. They have pigs as a conspiracy, but this idea of an overarching deep state, I've just never experienced that. What you do experience is let's take the oil companies. They'll all compete with our dollars at the gas pump, and they'll advertise and so on and so forth. But if any government comes up with a policy that threatens their ability to produce oil or sell it, they'll all come together. And that's really not necessarily a conspiracy. It's just that they have a common interest, which is defeating this particular law that's been proposed, or this rule. So there's a lot of that. Now, again, what we're experiencing in the United States, I think, is similar to what Russia experienced when Putin came to power. There was an oligarchy. He got rid of the old oligarchy and brought in a new oligarchy. Well, we have an oligarchy in the United States, and it's now being demolished and replaced by a new oligarchy, which is represented by Musk and his cadre of people. So we're going through this experience here in the United States where Trump is replacing kind of the old guard with his own new guard, and where is that going to go? I'm terribly concerned. I think Musk is extremely dangerous. He controls the satellite internet service in over 100 countries now. His company controls them, and he controls a lot of the spy satellites. What's he listening to? And right now it looks like he's controlling people's financial data in the United States through, it's very scary. I think the guy wants to be a dictator, a king, a monarch. And, Trump is, 80 or close to that. And, but Musk is in his 50s.
Maybe he wants to be a James Bond villain.
Well, I think you would see it as a James Bond hero, but he's who takes over the world. Yes, exactly. I think you would say, he's the Dr. No that's doing it all for the right reason.
I was going to say that, Dr. No, yeah. Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you in Iran right now?
No, I was in the UK. I moved to Oman, so I'm a bit closer to Iran, but I'm in Oman at the moment. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just in Qatar about a month ago, interviewing with Al Jazeera there.
Yeah.
But I love Iran. And it was one of my greatest.
Listen, if you want to go, let me know. I'm a flight away. I can meet you there. I'll get the visa for you. We'll meet there.
I'm not sure I'd ever get out.
I'll get your exit organized before we go in.
Oh, well,
if you genuinely want to go, let me know. I can ask some friends, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, yeah, I do.
Get my email from Grace. We'll sort it out for you.
Okay, we'll do. We'll be in touch.
Alex?
Yes, hi, John. A great honor to be on the call with you. I'm very disappointed that I wasn't able to join on time, but I guess I'll have to watch later. So I read your book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, probably more than 10 years ago, and it was a huge eye-opener. And I tried to understand from my own side how the system works. And I came to the conclusion that it's ultimately all about collateral, who controls it, because even as corporations go around the world exploiting those resources, the side that really benefits are the banks who get to issue loans on the base of those resources as collateral. So I wanted to ask if you happen to know how large is the role of Great Britain in all this? Because we see the U.S., but I recently, there was a major report issued. I wasn't able to find it right now, but I think in 2016, which found that 103 corporations listed on London Stock Exchange still had something like a combined $1 trillion worth of mineral resource concessions or outright ownership of the reserves throughout Africa, and that the system is essentially, nicely wrapped colonialism. And that's pretty big, but Britain, for some reason, is never discussed. It's always the United States, the American empire. And so in your observations, your experience, how much of a British role do you see?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Alex, I never really worked in England or even in partnership in these. Sometimes we worked in partnership with the French, especially we did that in Iran, where we had sort of mutual interests. Never really got involved with the UK, so I don't know that I'm qualified to even think very strongly about that question without doing a lot of research.
Fair enough. Well, it seems that they are extremely adept at concealing their role. And one thing that I was perplexed about is, for example, the Russiagate. Because Russiagate, if you paid attention, practically everybody involved was MI6 agents, or supposedly former MI6 agent. But Christopher Steele was a former MI6 agent. His immediate boss was Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, and Stefan Halper and Joseph Mifsud, I forget the names, but there's the 7 or 8 characters who were all British intelligence assets, and the only the supposed Russian source, the guy who gave them the inside information about Trump's whereabouts and adventures in Russia, was Christopher Steele's employee in London, apparently with a drinking problem. And the only network that was covering this kind of correctly was Fox News at the time, and particularly Sean Hannity, and because they took Trump's side. But nevertheless, they never ever mentioned Britain. It's just so Sean Hannity, practically every night, he would drop repeatedly these talking points, these like bumper sticker words of Russian lies, Russian disinformation, and the dossier concocted by foreign nationals. So you say Russian, but then when it comes to saying, and the British who put together the dossier, he would say foreign nationals, kind of giving the impression that it's the Russians again, and concealing the role of Britain. Anyway, my observations, I don't know. I'd like to find out more, but it's very hard, because even when you mention this to people who are on the ground, like I talked about this with Vanessa Beeley a few months ago. When I mentioned it, then she said like, oh, right, yeah, you're right. It does seem that the Brits always initiate these events on the ground, and then the Americans follow up or, back them up. But the second question I wanted to ask is, Soros, which I think is an important statement. He said that he sees the conflict in the world primarily as a conflict between two systems of governance. And then he goes into open societies versus closed societies, and other give the version of democracies versus autocracies. But as I see it, it's the Western colonial imperialistic oligarchic system versus pretty much everybody else, including the domestic populations. So Do you see it that way? Do you see that in your experience?
I would say I'm not quite sure what the question is. I was always saying
that the conflict we're looking at. So it's not just Guatemala, Ecuador, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Ukraine. It's primarily the conflict between two systems of governance, right? So the one that is being forced on everybody from the West is this oligarchic, colonialist, imperialistic system, which dresses up as freedom and democracy for public consumption against everybody else, but not merely foreign nations, but also, the British people, the American people, the Canadian people, domestic populations in the West.
Yeah. So, and Grace, I see your chats here. I actually, my next interview was postponed, so I can go over another 10 minutes beyond our time. I don't think it's a conflict between two systems, frankly. Two political systems, two governance systems. I think it's a conflict that revolves around economics. And of course, I'm an economist, so I would say that, right? But, the United States doesn't represent democracy. It's questionable whether we have it at all in this country. I think we were on an upper trajectory of attaining it. I think we've just taken a big tumble now. I think there is a real attempt here of overthrowing democracy in this country right now. With the administration that we have, and but also, we've never necessarily supported democratic governments. We overthrew one in Iran, and with the help of basically helping the British. So there you do have this. We have the CIA and MI6 have a long relationship. One of the reasons we overthrew Mossadegh in Iran way back in the 70s was because he threatened to overtake what is now BP, British Petroleum. And the British had no diplomatic presence in Iran. The United States did. And so the British government came to the United States and asked us to help and intercede. And since then, of course, in many different cases, where the CIA has not felt that it could go into a place like Iran. Now, in more recent times, the MI6 has felt that it could. So there is this relationship. But if you really look at, so we overthrew a democratically elected president of Iran and replaced him with a violent dictator, the Shah. And we've certainly supported dictators in many other places. Pinochet in Chile, we overthrew a democratically elected president, Allende in Chile. And Saudi Arabia we support, which is a dictatorship, and many other countries. So I don't think the United States has ever really been about spreading democracy in the world. I think that's an excuse. It's a little bit like the religious excuse that was the church during the Crusades really about spreading Christianity, or was it about stealing gold and other resources from the Arab countries? So I don't, but right now what the battle is control of resources under whatever name you do it in. And right now, I think, as I've said, China's winning that. But I think the overall thing we all need to be concerned with is that all of this is going toward continuing to promote the death economy. And that we know is our greatest threat. That is the threat to the world right now. And it is the cause of climate change, of income inequality, of species extinctions, of environmental destruction. We must turn that around if we want to survive on a planet that we'll recognize.
Okay, thank you. No, when I asked my question, I didn't think that the West defended democracy. I think it's an oligarchic colonialist system in essence, but they only dress it up as promoting freedom and democracy. But right. I think, yes, obviously it goes always towards the control of resources. Anyway, thank you. A+ from me, and I'll pass the baton to the next questioner.
Thank you, Alex.
I'm sorry, I had some issues with the camera, so I couldn't join earlier. I just wanted to ask you a question regarding the difference between what is in your view the true size of an economy of a country. Like, for example, GDP, nominal GDP, and GDP purchasing power parity. Because oftentimes when they're comparing the economic power of Russia with other countries, they would say, "Oh, it's an economy the size of Spain." But to me, the military power doesn't simply make it possible for a country to have such a military with an economy the size of Spain. So what do you think about that?
Did you want to ask another question, Alex?
No, let Drago go, and then if there's time left, I'll.
Oh, he's not. It doesn't seem he's been trying to load for a while, so maybe you can go straight in and ask your question.
John, just last thing. I wanted to say I've noticed in many. I kind of pay attention what these people are saying, and I've noticed in many cases that there's a certain fear of the IMF among many countries that are being financed by the IMF. There's like absolutely a fear of the IMF.
So, well, that should be.
Okay, can you explain? Because IMF, what they're bankers, they're nice people in suits.
They're policemen. They're policemen. So the loans are made by the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But when the loans can't be repaid, and I'm oversimplifying here, but in a simplistic view, the IMF goes in and says, "Okay, you can't repay your loans. We'll help you restructure your loans. And in order to do that, you've got to meet these conditionalities, like sell your resource real cheap to the Western corporations, allow military bases, impose austerity programs, neoliberalism, impose austerity programs on the majority of the people and drop the taxes on the rich, privatize your public sector businesses like your water and sewer system, your electrical system, and sell them to private investors from our countries." So the IMF goes in and they really restructure things, and it sounds like they're being nice guys. Okay, we're going to help you out of countries can't file for bankruptcy, which I think is unfortunate, frankly. So instead, the IMF goes in and says, "We'll help you out of this terrible debt situation you're in, but there's a price to pay. You've got to impose our conditionalities, our will." And I think what this ties in actually, I think, with the question that Drago asked, which is, my answer to that would be, I don't think either of those economic measures are really very telling about overall prosperity, whether it's purchasing power parity or whether it's the more traditional way of measuring GDP. They both measure how well the wealthy are doing, primarily. And then we break that down on a per capita basis, and you think it's talking about everybody, but it really isn't. We need a different measuring stick altogether. As the old classic is, bomb the hell out of a country, and that increases your GDP here in the United States. And we bomb the hell out of somebody because our military industry is doing great, and then later we go in and rebuild the country, and that's increasing our GDP even more. And actually, it's increasing the GDP of the country too, probably, in the process of doing that. It's an absurd measure, and it totally works in favor of big corporations, and that's why it continues to be used.
Thank you.
I thought so.
Pregnant silence.
Gregor, please go on. I will add this at the end. Oh, I just said one sentence concerning the IMF and the change of a country. We could see it in Greece. The situation is, if the IMF goes into the country, they change the social system, they change the health security system, and they change everything in this way that the country has to buy medical drugs in billions from the Western world.
Mhm.
So all the money which goes in the system by the IMF or by the banks is also going back to the pharmaceutical industry and chemical industry. This was what I want to mention.
Well, yeah, and I mean it goes beyond that. So you know, we right now, you know, Trump is pressuring countries to, especially European countries, to devote a lot more of their defense budgets to a lot more of their budgets to defense. He's saying, if you originally said 2% of GDP, and now it seems to be 5% of GDP. But I think in all that process, what gets left out is the fact that a lot of that money is then used to buy U.S. equipment and help the U.S. economy. You could say the same in Ukraine. You know, like, oh, well, the United States has given all this money to Ukraine. Most of it isn't given; it's loans with collateral. We don't know how much. I keep trying to get a figure on how much of all this aid is a loan. I don't know. I try very hard, but I can't find the answer to that. Any of you have the answer, please share it with me. But we know that a lot of it's loans. But in any case, a lot of that money is then used to buy U.S. equipment. So it's a self-serving process here. Oh yeah, Europe needs to devote more money to its defense industry. Oh yeah, that means they got to buy our equipment, and the same with Ukraine, and of course it goes on and on and on. So it's this old adage, you know, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And we're very much locked. That's part of the death economy. We're very much locked into this death economy. And so my whole thing is we've got to turn this economic system around that isn't so dependent on extreme materialism. And it isn't so dependent on any particular central banking system that controls, that has a currency that controls the world. I mean, that's a dangerous situation too. What are the alternatives? What are the answers to these questions? I don't know a lot of the answers, but you know, that's something that we really, really need to delve into. We are at the frontier. We know that we have created and are continuing to create a system that is failing us, failing the world. Never been in this situation before. So we really need to think outside the box and come up with new solutions. And that's very challenging. And most politicians don't want to touch that. And of course, therein lies another problem. Leadership is so much the problem, always has been. It's the leaders that cause the problems. And a few good leaders find solutions. But I think that too needs to change, where we, the people, all of you guys, need to, you know, really, really think outside the box and move forward with this. And, you know, it's interesting. I don't know whether this has any relevance or not, but I just said all of you guys, and I looked at that screen, and it's all guys except for Grace. Where are the women, Grace?
They're all good. They're doing something important.
Good.
Cooking and ironing.
All right. They're making you all look good. Okay. So, Drago, if you have more, because I know you've been having trouble with your technology.
Yeah, I've been having trouble joining because of the stupid
Please.
camera. Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, from what I've gathered so far, back in March, the Ukrainian government, I mean the Kiev regime, whatever you want to call it, they said that they got $172 billion. So by March 2024. And now Zelensky is saying that they only got 77 billion, which means that there's 100 billion that's essentially missing. So from what I was able from what I understood, a lot of the money actually came back to the United States to the DNC because they were funneling this money because they were losing a lot of donors already during the Biden administration. So they had to get money somehow. So what they were doing, they were funneling it back into the U.S. through various means, including the FTX and other ways. So I guess a lot of money actually didn't even go to the U.S. military-industrial complex, but to the political elite directly.
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't heard that. That's very, very interesting. yeah, I don't know. I don't have any comment.
Oh, by the way, what do you think about the impact of the economic policies of the United States in the destruction of countries like Yugoslavia, for example? Because I know that Reagan actually had a lot of these policies in place, which ensured that the federal system in the country stopped functioning, and the republics were essentially incentivized not to give the federal center any money. So, do you think that the U.S. policies on loans and economic reforms in Yugoslavia, do you think that that was crucial in destroying the country?
Well, again, I never was involved in Yugoslavia. It would be pure speculation on my part, and I don't like to speculate. I like to talk about places where I've been involved. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised, but what that was the truth, but I don't know. And I am struck as we talk about this by how you know Trump has recently, when he decided to close down USAID and do a lot of other federal disemployment, talks about the inefficiency in government, and I think that's all there. There's a lot of inefficiency, but the solution to inefficiency is not wiping out the system; it's making it more efficient. It's really tightening it up, and I think that's an important part of it. And also at the same time, I think when Trump says that USAID and our other foreign aid has been used deeply for political reasons, he's right. It has been, and I don't think it should be. So I think those are all things that we really need to take a really good look at. But again, as I mentioned earlier, the problem here is that if the United States doesn't use these, when I say the problem, I'm saying the problem from the view of the United States, is that if it doesn't use these means to exert its control over so many other countries, the Chinese are going to come in and exert their control. And this is where we are today. We're at this crucial moment where we know we've got to create a new economic system, a life economy. And at the same time, we've got these two incredibly powerful, economically powerful nations and militarily powerful nations that are clashing. Where does that take us? You'd have to be a fool not to be afraid that it's going to take us to something graver, not to think of that as the possibility. On the other hand, we're talking. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got a program with China News Agency later this week. And I was recently talking to Al Jazeera in Doha, and I was on Russian television recently, and I was on and on and on and on and on and on and on. I do a lot of podcasts, and everywhere I go and everybody I talk to is concerned. They're all asking the similar questions, and that's a damn good thing that we are. But the question is, how do we take the actions that back up? The good news is that all over the world, people realize that we've got to change. There is a consciousness revolution around the world. At the same time, there's this incredible pushback, as there's always been pushback against revolutionaries. And you think of this as a revolution of consciousness revolution. There's always a pushback. That's historical, that those who are in the status quo, they don't want to see change. But I think the important message here is that we need to take strength from that pushback. I've been a martial artist most of my life, and I realize that if I'm up against a guy who's bigger and stronger than me, I don't even want to try to overpower him. I've got to use his energy and his strength against him. And so when we're confronted by the pushback, we let it come, we use its energy, we figure out how to channel that in a way that's going to help our cause, which is higher consciousness of what it means to be human beings, being human on this planet. I do a lot of work with indigenous people in the Amazon and elsewhere. I just came back from the Amazon too, doing a lot of traveling recently, way too much perhaps. But the big difference, I think, between them and us is that they believe that they are a part of nature. And we believe we're apart from nature. And yet, if we go back to over the 200,000 plus years that we've seen ourselves as humans, most of that time we've been a part of, we've understood that we are a part of, not apart from nature. It's only been within the last couple of thousand years, a blink in the historical eye, that we've changed that. And it's been particularly since World War II that's changed, and even more so in the most recent decades, in the most recent years. So it's time to understand that we've got to come up with a new approach, and it's going to be revolutionary, and it is a consciousness revolution, and a revolution in how we define what it means to be successful human beings. Who do we put on the covers of our magazines? Do we continue to put the guys that have got the highest income? Do we worship a guy like Musk because he happens to have so damn much money? Is that a measurement, a good measurement? Let's make that a bad measurement. Robert Barron. And let's put on the cover of our magazines and let's honor as heroes the ones that are working toward creating a life economy. All of you, I think. Maybe I don't know enough about you. Maybe you're all pushing for the death economy, but I have a feeling that you're not. So, I think we are running out of time. I'm running out of time, but my last message that I'd like to leave with all of you and all the listeners is to feel that we live in blessed times. Man, what an exciting time to be alive, where we're truly looking at redefining what it means to be human beings, being human on this planet. We're being pushed into it, and here we are. And isn't it wonderful to be able to participate in this and to be part of the movement to change the death economy, transform it into a life economy?
Beautiful ending. Anyone else?
That was on
Alex,
point.
you were
100%.
writing, Alex.
I'm sorry?
Were you writing a question or something?
No, I wasn't. I was just listening.
Right. Well, that was a beautiful ending, but perhaps just because, all you favorite people of mine, in addition to my other favorite people, came a little later. Please, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, Alex, so John can know you, Drago, and also Reza. Please invite our audience and get to know, even for a short time, introduce yourself to John and the audience. Alex?
Oh, so I'm an author and an analyst, and I have my own business. I used to be a hedge fund manager. Now I'm more in the technology and publishing work. And I am very keenly interested in how we leave this place better for the future generations. And I'm motivated by a very strong sense that what we should be capable of doing should be it should even defy our imaginations, because we are the first generation in the history of humanity that has all these insane resources, the information, the knowledge that can be exchanged in real time, the artificial intelligence, the ability to exchange knowledge point to point instantaneously, costlessly. We can figure out everything we need to know to design a completely new operating system for our societies that should be better than anything we've known so far. And so I want to understand where the nodes are, what are the nodes that can turn a system into something pathogenic, or turn the system into something that should be magically wonderful and beautiful and good. So that's what I'm about, and that's what my I feel like more and more is becoming my life's work.
Thanks, Alex. And Grace, I've got to say, I do have to leave now. We've got another 15 minutes, so I'm sorry. I apologize. Let's do it again. This has been really fun. Thank you, all of you, so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I will just continue to introduce the rest, and but at least now, John, know that Alex is highly censored. He produced a highly censored book. So if you are the New York's best author, Alex is the censored best author.
Congratulations. That's a feather in your cap for sure.
Right.
All right, guys. Thank you
Thank you,
so
Thank you.
John.
much.
Bye.
Bye
And
bye.
bye. And Drago, please, yeah, introduce yourself again because some of the audience don't know you because they were part of the John Perkins group. But I know that some of them, Alex, know you, and they said, "Oh, Alex is here," so they're happy. So,
Oh, okay.
Drago.
Yeah, well, I'm a geopolitical and military analyst. I write for BRICS, and I'm featured on a number of other media outlets. And pretty much that's pretty much about me. I'm very focused on those topics, the current topics. I also like history very much. So if anyone is interested in that, I would also like to talk about that at some point. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much about me.
Thank you, Drago. And Reza, please invite them. Can you hear me, Dr. Reza?
Yes, I
You want
can.
to invite them to your what you're doing?
At the moment, I've just moved to Oman, so settling in. Now I'm looking at actually, I'm gonna try and pick Alex's brain at some point if I can email you because I'm starting a publication.
He's a
And it's funny.
filmmaker, Alex.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Well, I
Fantastic.
was I was a filmmaker. Now I'm moving towards publications,
that's good.
because I've like you said, I want to use modern technology, AI, and all of the technologies that we have to shift and bring knowledge from the east to the west, knowledge written or expanded upon by Eastern scholars and philosophers and scientists without it being filtered to the West. So that's something. And also, I just wanted to say, whenever I see Alex in one of the famous podcasts, I quickly listen to it because he's one of those who always brings new information and knowledge and insight. He doesn't repeat himself. So I'm very glad that I've met you. Thank you.
Thank you, Reza. Likewise. And I also wanted to say, I'm also one of those people who's dying to visit Iran and travel.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
And yeah, well, that would be wonderful. But can
Yeah.
you? I was perplexed a little bit because John said, "Oh, if I went there, I wouldn't be able to get out anymore." What was that all
He'll be
about?
fine. He wrote a book that is basically, I just looked it up. It's translated into Iranian. Probably a lot of Iranian PhD students would have read it. So he's probably has a following there he doesn't even know about. That's one. Two, he may have done some stuff with the Shah, but everyone was doing with the Shah. At that time when he was doing business with Iran,
Oh,
it wasn't like, you know what I mean? So I will speak to people to make sure that he can exit properly without having any problems. But I'm
okay. So it's not like
99.9%
the
sure.
Hotel California that you can go in, but you
No,
can never leave.
no. You know
Okay.
when he said, I didn't say this in front of him, but you know when he said, "Oh, I'm lucky I left because I have found I would have been like the American diplomats." They were actually, if you look at the history, they were actually CIA agents in the embassy, right? And when he was talking about it was, I think, August of '98. That happened later on in, I think, in '79 November. So there was a year and a half between that happening with CIA assets and him wanting to leave. So he would have been fine if he stayed for the meeting. Yeah.
Very cool.
Thank you. And Roy, go ahead and invite our audience.
Yeah, so I have the Awakening podcast. I've also a meditation podcast, a crypto podcast, and a few others. And I also have virtual assistants on va.world, and you find everything on roycollin.com.
Thank you. Hartmut? Hartmut, can you hear me? Well, Hartmut, you're muted. Well, anyway.
Yes, now it works.
Yeah, okay.
Well, yes.
Where they can get in touch with you if someone wants to get in touch with you.
If they want to get in touch with me, they can go over your email at the moment because my website is not finished at the moment. Go Your Own Path will come, and I'm specialized in international business and coaching. And I want to end this podcast with a very interesting sentence from Thomas Aquinas. He was a philosopher from 1200 1825 to 1274. And I read it today, and he said, "Reason must descend into the valley of the tears, carried and driven by the assistance of God." And this is this is nearly 900 years old, this sentence, and I think it's very accurate for the times today.
Thank you very much. And let's see. Yeah, I know. I was trying to see what your message is. Go ahead, Alex, please. You can unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I just wanted to ask Hartmut for maybe a very, very brief sit rep about Germany. How there's the elections are in about 13 days, no?
Yes.
So
Germany at the moment, the Alternative for Germany has 25%. It will become the second largest party in the opposition. The situation is that we have someone said something very interesting. There was an author in 2017 who predicted that the German government will fail in 2025. And he says in 2017, he said that for 1 year, it will not the AfD party will get in control, because all the other parties will come together in order to stop the AfD party from becoming powerful. But after 1 year mismanagement, Germany will have the first AfD chancellor. This was written in a book on 2017, and it looks like that it will be like that. Yeah. So this, let's say it this way: if we try to make a law against re-immigration, and the first thing is voted yes, and then the second, the more important law is voted no, it makes no sense, and especially if the Green Party and the Christian Democratic Party, they have a party in the flat of the Christian Democratic Party, so everything seems to be arranged already. Yeah, it seems like that.
And is it possible in Germany that if the people vote the wrong way, then they do like in France, where Macron said like, okay, so you voted like this, but no good. I'll form a government like that I think is best.
I have a nice story. I have a nice story. 3 4 weeks ago, there were some activists in the cities, and they put construction foam in the pipe of a car. Yeah. So, and then there was a piece of paper with the face of our Minister of Economy, Mr. Habeck. Please become greener. So, and everyone was really pissed off about this. Yeah. And now the court, and what's the word for the court, the German protection ministry have stopped someone with a lot of construction foam in the car, and now they are examining whether the Russian Secret Service was doing this in order to make a bad reputation of the Green Party. And you can see the Minister of Economy claiming this. You can see the Minister of Inner Affairs claiming
That's
this.
fantastic.
Putin was it.
The Russians are everywhere, man. Like they're doing everything.
And the intelligence of the Russians is so effective in order to make propaganda to put construction foam in the pipes of a car. And you see it really you see it in the TV show. You see the Minister of Economy say that that it's nearly possible that the Russians were the one. So, with this, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, they already try to prepare the cancellation of the election.
Of the elections.
Yes, because
Well, they threatened it, right? They said that they will do it just like they did in Romania. So
now we have evidence. Yeah, the complete election maybe will be cancelled because of construction foam in the pipe of the cars.
See, it's interesting that we can afford to really laugh about all of these things. So,
But I want to mention one thing so that you understand, because John said something very important. He said that we are dealing here with a death economy, and this death economy is moving faster and faster. For example, the German government is not allowed to make any important decisions, but without noticing of the public, the German government, without having the right to do it, they implemented a new law that from 2027, the liter gasoline will cost €2.50 because of CO2 taxes. And if you understand that this is an increase of 100% within 1 year, how do you want to pay that as a usual habitant of Germany?
it's going to crash the economy, right?
It will crush the economy latest in 2027. And this is the war what we are really facing. Yeah.
Well, okay, everyone. Thank you very much. And I guess John will just have a good time listening to our laughter and comments because, of course, I have to send this and I didn't. It's still live, okay? So for those viewers, please follow John Perkins at johnperkins.org. And of course, remember me, graceasagra.com, and you can email me for any requests of guest or something, graceasagra@ymail, and I'll help you also with your health if you would like to connect with me, okay? All right, so thank you all for those who joined us during this live stream. Please share and like, and thank you for everything that you all do in your own ways somewhere around the globe. Okay, and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.